And now the future. Given everything that we have heard so far tonight, the question that demands asking is contained in this resolution. China is destined for regional dominance. First to debate this is David Shambaugh. China is destined for regional dominance. David Shambaugh, do you declare yes or no?
Turn it around and say no this time. And for two essential reasons. First, that others in the region wouldn't stand for Chinese regional dominance. This is not the Ming Dynasty or the Song Dynasty where the tribute system obtained and existed and others dutifully fell into the Chinese hierarchy. The Chinese may want that, but I can tell you, with the exception of South Korea, not many in Asia want to go down that path. And secondly, there are other actors of significance in the region: Japan, India, Indonesia, and indeed the United States. So they would balance against China. This is the iron law of international relations. So I don't foresee it for that reason. The second reason I don't foresee Chinese dominance is because the Chinese are very capable of overstepping and overreaching economically and in other ways. They are, like many other great powers, they are oftentimes bullying and intimidating. And
I'm sorry, time is up on you. Thanks very much, David Shambaugh.
Stop there.
Thank you. China is destined for regional dominance. Ian Bremmer, do you declare yes or no?
I declare no. So I agree very much with what David had to say. I would also focus not just on East Asia, Southeast Asia, but Central Asia. Focus on Russia. The fact that the Chinese are increasingly just dominating places like Kazakhstan, as well as economically East Siberia, and the Russians are deeply uncomfortable with it. They don't have the population, but they have the military capability. And the Chinese don't know how to manage it. One Belt, One Road, they're putting all this money in a lot of countries, but Russia, not so much.
Just remind people One Belt, One Road, what that's about.
It's this, $1 trillion that the Chinese are putting. It's kind of like their Marshall Plan, but without liberal democracy at the end. And that's a short definition. But I will tell you that while I don't think they're destined for regional dominance, I think it's quite possible they're destined for global dominance, and that really depends on whether or not, as Elon Musk says, they get AI right before other people do. That, for me, is a big question.
Thank you, Ian Bremmer. Liz Economy, on the resolution, China is destined for regional dominance. Do you declare yes or no?
No surprise. I'm a no. I think destined is a big word, and it demands a big commitment, and I'm not prepared to make that commitment. I see three significant impediments to China becoming the dominant regional power. First, right now the U.S. is the dominant military power, as General Petraeus said, by an order of magnitude. And it has demonstrated no indication of being interested in abdicating that position. Second, in economic terms, although China is a very important player in the region and indeed the largest trading partner for most of the countries, it is an inconsequential source of foreign direct investment for all the countries in the region except for Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar. Which I think many people would find surprising. And then third goes back to exactly what David said, and that is that nobody else in the region wants China to be the dominant regional power. And so you have India and Japan and Vietnam, Indonesia, Australia, all working together and in concert with the United States on occasion to ensure that that does not happen.
Thank you, Liz Economy. The resolution, China is destined for regional dominance. Noah Feldman, are you yes or no?
On the one hand, you have three brilliant area experts, and on the other hand, you have the possibility of a real conversation. So I'm going to go with yes.
Noah Feldman, we are very grateful.
Well. You can take the law professor out of the law school, but so look. Global dominance, I do not think, is an inevitable destiny for China, because for all the reasons that we've discussed, it is not yet in a position to achieve that. It may never be in a position to achieve that. China already has regional economic dominance on issue after issue after issue, on country after country after country. Over a long period of time, other countries in the region will still have a desire. There's no question they have a desire to retain a close strategic relationship with the US to protect themselves against China. But that will become increasingly difficult as the US is less and less willing to provide that and no longer sees the benefits of doing that. I would say the Trump administration's policy here is the leading edge of what may be a 50 or 75-year change in American attitudes. Take the question of whether the US would at present use military force to defend Taiwan. If in your hearts you think the answer to that question is no, then the answer to this question is yes.
Thank you very much, Noah Feldman. And you know, Noah, because you're such a good sport to take the other side on this one solo, I'm going to, if you'd like to continue your thought, I'm going to give you another minute to go with it and then give us, your opponent, something to chew on.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please do.
Of Noah? Okay, so it'll go back to Noah. What does it mean to say that China has regional economic dominance? What does that mean in your mind?
It means that China is the largest and most significant trading partner of every country in the region, broadly defined. That means that its economic leverage over those countries is enormous. It means that capital flows in both directions are great and growing. It means that the cultural influences that come with greater economic exchange are also going to grow over time. And with respect to forms of governance, which we touched on a bit earlier, but I would have loved for us to have a chance to say more about, even though it's true that none of those countries are trying to govern the way that China does, it's also true that the bloom is off the rose of the idea that democracy on the US model is the best way to govern your country. And in that sense, that can be seen as Chinese influence insofar as there's increasing recognition that countries actually can get away with disaggregating political reform from economic reform. I know we would like to say, and David's written a book, saying that that's a short-term thing, in the long run we'll all see that they are linked, but I'm not so sure about it.
You're getting lots of looks of skepticism from Liz Economy in particular.
I just want to know, because we can never agree, basically, not on any one of these points. So I think
fun. That's good. Makes it
it's
fun.
interesting, right? So no, I think I'd make 2 points, I guess. First, whatever China's regional economic power is, it's not enough to persuade the Philippines to change course with regard to the South China Sea. Right, so 5 years or so worth of boycotting Philippine exports, some exports. It's not enough to make South Korea change course on THAAD, right, as they're boycotting Lotte, the major South Korean department store. And again, China is a very distant third to the European Union and Japan when it comes to investment in Southeast Asia. So, and it's not clear to me at all that China's cultural and political influence is going to flow out of its being a large trading partner, not to mention the fact that with many, many of these countries, it's running a trade surplus, which irritates a lot of these countries. Well, so I'm not sure that it endears the countries to China in a way that is going to grant China greater influence.
So if there's one lesson, to my mind, of the last century, it's of the US and its dominance, is that dominance does not lead, you can dominate people without endearing yourself to them. And in fact, to the contrary, dominating people never makes you feel endeared to them. My point is not, I completely agree with you that it will always be in the geostrategic interest of the Philippines to protect the South China Sea or of South Korea to try to maintain aerial defenses. My point is they can only do that because of us. Those are only credible positions. The Philippines can only stand up, quote unquote, to China. South Korea can only stand up, quote unquote, to China if they have us behind them. And if the US over time, this is really my key point, if the US over time ceases to think, and I mean the US as a people, I don't mean foreign policy experts like people around the table. If ordinary people think that it's not in the US interest to put a huge part of our military budget into constructing a military that enables us to defend Pacific states, then these countries will have no choice. They will still feel the same way, but there will be reality that will interfere.
Let's put that point on the table for David Shambaugh. The argument that Noah Feldman is making, and again, David, you're arguing no, China will not be regionally dominant. Noah is saying to the degree that its dominance is hemmed in by us, that 30, 50 years from now, he doesn't really see the American people wanting to support military action that costs us in that part of the world to protect countries like Taiwan, Japan, the Philippines, et cetera. What about that premise?
I think you need to disaggregate dominance, and you need to disaggregate Asia. As I say, I just came back from half a year in Southeast Asia. There, Noah is absolutely correct. China has primarily economic dominance. Japan is also a very significant actor. The United States, less so and declining in Southeast Asia. Northeast Asia, that's not the case at all. But if you look at the other indices of China's regional posture, military, cultural, political, diplomatic, there you don't find anything approaching dominance. China's not the major diplomatic actor in Asia. Its military is, I think General Petraeus was indicating earlier, and Ian mentioned, is a regional military. It's growing very quickly, and certainly stronger than any other military in the region except the United States, but it's they haven't had a war since 1979, and they're an unproven force, I would argue. Political model, I don't see others wishing to emulate that. And culture, does China have soft power? Does the Chinese culture and system travel? Does it have universality in Asia or elsewhere? I'd say very limited.
Ian Bremmer.
Chinese have been picking up a lot of influence. I mean, Taiwan, Hong Kong, it's very clear that they have effective dominion over that in a way that the Americans would not have ceded even 10 years ago. And I think over the coming 10 years, there'll be other countries that we feel that way about. Pakistan may well be one. Certainly many of the Southeast Asians. Singapore is quite concerned as a consequence. But there are two reasons that I really don't buy the idea that this is destined. One is not the economics. If Asia was just about economics, I'd feel much more comfortable with this formulation, certainly with the fact that the Chinese can write really big checks and they can bring the whole apparatus of the state together with it. But the fact is that unlike the United States, which is surrounded by Canada, Mexico, and big bodies of water, Asia is geopolitically fraught, and it's only going to become more so going forward. And so I think the idea that China is going to be able to be regionally dominant in a part of the world that's likely to see vastly more conflict going forward, I don't buy it. Second point is a lot of people talk about the coming Chinese century. There's been an American century, now there's a Chinese century. I don't think we do centuries anymore. Destined implies to me this sweep of history where the Chinese are going to be in charge. When I look at China's military in 20 years, I think about things like drone swarms. I think about things like infantry. And I don't know what the balance of power in Asia is going to look like, but I do know that the idea that China is going to be able to take manifest their plans of building over the last 30 years and just plow them through for another 15, I wouldn't put a lot of money in stake at that. So it's possible that they'll get there. If you wanted to bet on any one country in the region being dominant, I'd bet on China, but I wouldn't bet much. I bet much more on the United States still being regionally dominant in the Western Hemisphere.
Noah Feldman, so directly to your point, Ian Bremmer is saying that that he thinks the U.S. will hang in. 50 years
Yeah, I
from
mean,
now.
I think one thing that strikes me across the debate is that the views that I'm expressing seem to be more skeptical of the U.S. public being willing to sustain a global position of dominance than my colleagues seem to think.
Could we just stop you on that? Because you've made that point a few times and haven't directly heard from your opponents. Just go down the line. What's the time frame you're talking about? 30 years?
Yeah.
Okay. Just down the line, Ian Bremmer, do you think the U.S. public will be willing to sustain its military, the U.S. military presence and that commitment in that part of the world 30 years from now?
No way, but it doesn't change any of the points I
Okay.
just made.
Liz Economy?
Yes.
Yes? David Shambaugh?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, back to you, Noah.
Okay, so I think
either way. I mean,
yeah,
the whole
I mean,
network.
the subject of our debate tonight isn't primarily what does the U.S. public think, but I
Right.
do urge people to ask themselves if they would support in their hearts or predict that the U.S. would intervene militarily to protect not just Taiwan, but any of Japan, let's say,
Yeah, we're talking
or
about
South
millennia.
Korea.
Treaty,
for Christ's sake, right?
Japan
I
is a
mean, you know,
treaty
clearly.
ally. I mean, we are
I know,
compelled by
and what
treaty,
I'm
so you're
and-
saying
and-
that we will back out of our treaty.
Correct. What I'm saying, Liz, what I'm saying is that in the world that we all occupy of formally trained political scientists with a deep knowledge of political science norms, it's impossible to say that the United States would back away from its commitment, which is embodied in a treaty of international law. And what I'm saying is that, if people ask themselves inwardly, would you support the U.S. doing so, even in the presence of a treaty? I think many people in the room and many people in the country, and a huge number of people who voted for Donald Trump, would say that the answer is no way, never heard of the treaty, definitely don't care about it. And
We should take a vote right here.
If we weren't doing this to radio, I wouldn't be averse to a show of hands. I've actually tried this asking a room full of military people. Everyone says, of course we would defend them. That's what we have in Navy. And then I ask a room
Let's
full
do
of
a show of
civilians,
hands. Let's do
and
a show.
everybody says, first of all, what are you talking about? Like, of course we wouldn't do that. So the point that I'm making here is simply that if the U.S. public can't sustain that sort of commitment over the long term, if it doesn't see a clear economic payoff to regional dominance in Asia, for example, that is likely to shift the geostrategy, the geopolitics of the region. And again, in the absence of the U.S. position, China will de facto dominate the region. And
This economy, you're going to get the last word.
Yeah, I
Okay,
just want to make a totally different point, and that is that we have not even raised the possibility that China is not going to be in a position to be a regionally dominant power, because actually its economy is going to collapse, or at least it's going to slow down so significantly that it's not going to be able to continue on the path that it's on.
And Ian, you look anxious to make a point, so go
Not
for
really
it.
anxious. No, I agreed with Liz there, but I just can't see the fact that if the Americans pull out, to me that does not ensure Chinese dominance. Instead, it makes it much more likely that we're going to have very significant confrontation. The U.S. staying in, I think, helps with stability.
Totally agree with it. I hope, by the way, I hope I'm wrong.
Oh, you're all agreeing. Okay, well, that's good because that concludes this round of debate on this resolution. China is destined for regional dominance.